You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Trump has left the building. Over.
We can now project the winner of the presidential race. Donald Trump wins the presidency.
What started off as unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
Just before the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, Donald Trump shared that clip on Truth Social. It's a slick 2.5-minute video, almost like a movie trailer, and it's a reminder of what he promised America.
I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down.
His second tenure as president begins in just 5 days, and he has his work cut out for him. The economy, immigration, foreign relations, just to name a few. Nick Harper joins me from Washington, D.C. to discuss America under Trump 2.0. Nick, hi.
Hi, Teresa.
You've come on the podcast before to talk about Trump, Biden, all things in between. I love when you do, because you're such a calm voice when it comes to American politics, when it can be anything but. So first off, I want to do a pulse check. Since Donald Trump won the presidency on the 5th of November, what has sentiment in America been?
Yeah, and just on the last year, I mean, it's certainly been a chaotic roller coaster ride. So thanks for saying that I've sounded calm. But look, I think it really depends on who you ask. Democrats, of course, ahead of the election, there was really that sense of optimism. And then the balloon popped. And in many ways, they've retreated back into their burrows over the last few weeks. We've heard very little from prominent Democrat voices. And speaking to Democrat friends, some of them have accepted the result. Of course, they feel that it was the result that happened. They don't feel that it was a stolen election. But there is that sense from some people I've spoken to that we are approaching very dark days, predicting not quite the end of the world, but not far off. Republicans, though, on the other hand, I mean, there's been jubilation, but I think more than that, this sense of validation, this feeling that Donald Trump, the man who they believe had a fantastic first term in office, is now going to come back and save the United States. I mean, in his words, we're about to enter a golden age. And I think many Republicans, some of whom I've spoken to, really do feel that America is about to turn a corner. And the reason for that is Donald Trump.
The first 100 days, they're usually used as a benchmark, right, to measure the success of a president. So for Mr. Trump, what will those 100 days look like? You know, what's your sense of his first order of business?
Well, it's funny because 100 days, that's the benchmark, but he's spoken so much about his first day. He's promised to do so much within just his first few hours of office. He's even joked that he's going to set up a tiny little desk on the steps of the Capitol where he'll be taking the oath of office on inauguration day. And he says that he could sign 4 or 5 executive orders after taking the oath. I think immigration is going to be the big one. He's promised the largest mass deportation effort in Americans' history. We could see the border security being ramped up, perhaps even the border with Mexico being sealed. We could then see raids to try and rout out illegal immigrants and deport them from the country. He's promised to do many things with the economy, saying that he will fight inflation, even though inflation has dropped over the last few years from those historic highs. But he says that he will slash regulations, that he'll overturn many of the climate change policies that President Biden has put into place, including one very recently, the ban on offshore oil and gas drilling. Remember, Donald Trump has promised to drill, baby drill, to ramp up domestic production. And then there's also the possibility, it wouldn't necessarily be an executive order, but that he could go on a revenge campaign to try and launch investigations against people who he feels have slighted him in the past. And some of those could be top Democrats or Republicans who in the past voted to impeach him.
Mm-hmm. And another thing Trump promised on the campaign trail was to try and broker a settlement in the Russia-Ukraine war. The Financial Times, it was the first to report that he's actually pushed back his campaign pledge to end the conflict in 24 hours to several months now. How is that all expected to play out?
Yeah, very ambitious, that 24-hour timeline. Mm-hmm. He has appointed a special envoy to look into this, a Russia envoy, a Ukraine envoy, that combined joint role. It's going to be Kellogg. He's a retired general. He has in the past worked as a former national security advisor. And Keith Kellogg has admitted that it will probably take some time longer, but it's really what that deal might look like. Remember, Ukraine doesn't want to give up territory that Russia has taken. I think trying to hammer out a deal will be tough, but one thing that will certainly happen very, very quickly is the drying up of military support for Ukraine. Donald Trump has said he wants to stop sending billions of dollars of worth of humanitarian aid and military aid to Kiev.
And from one war to another, Trump has also signaled he wants to quickly end the war in Gaza. How realistic is this?
Yeah, potentially this one could be an easier one to solve because bear in mind there have been ceasefire talks ongoing now for months. Back last summer, Joe Biden suggested this three-part plan that really the Biden administration has been suggesting they've been edging towards in recent months. Donald Trump has promised to unleash hell if the hostages are not released. It will probably take some time, but potentially just because there are those foundations already in place, it could be an easier conflict to solve than the Russia-Ukraine one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, let's pivot to where I am, Asia, watching as Trump begins his second presidency. From your view in Washington, what does his return mean for this part of the world?
Well, potentially rocky relations with China. That's going to be the big one. Remember, during his first term, he introduced billions of dollars worth of tariffs. There was reciprocal tariffs from Beijing. There was that trade war. Those tariffs being kept in place by President Biden, it's worth noting. But Donald Trump has promised even more tariffs. One suggestion at one point, he suggests he would increase them by 100%. So is that a threat or will he carry it out? Lots of people have weighed in, including a member of the advisory committee for the Securities Association of China, Dong Xiaopeng. This is what he had to say.
Trump's trade war with China, I think that it is quite likely. We need to first strengthen communication with the Trump administration, showing our willingness to facilitate global circulation, and we will also further optimize our employment and tax policies. If Trump insists on such a trade war, then we will first deliver our message.
And then there's the question of Taiwan, because Donald Trump has been suggesting that the island will need to pay more for US protection, also saying that Taiwan has stolen America's chip industry. What happens to those better Japan-South Korea relations that we've seen under President Biden? Will those continue? And of course, what's going to happen to his old friend, that bromance we saw last time around with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un? I mean, there was 3 summits. Will we see more summits or will there be something more of a standoff relationship? It's really very unclear how that will all play out.
Yeah, a lot of us in the newsroom are wondering about that relationship as well. Mr. Trump, he's been grabbing headlines for what could be labeled as an expansionist, imperialist agenda that he has. You know, he says he wants to turn Canada into the 51st state. He refuses to rule out seizing Greenland, the Panama Canal as well. And he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Nick, how much of this is just Trump being Trump and how much of this is actually serious?
I mean, it's so hard to tell. When he gets up and speaks, he likes to riff. He likes to say things off the cuff. And you do have to wonder whether these are things he just thought of in the moment or whether he's serious about them, in particular, renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, when it comes to Greenland in particular, he says that is a national security issue because it's really the fastest route between the US and Europe. And therefore, the US needs it to have that pivotal position in terms of national security. Trying to steal Canada, make it part of the United States, it seems outlandish, but it's really the type of thing that, you know, when Donald Trump speaks, he could say anything. Some of those might be threats because he likes to threaten to try and get a better deal, better terms on a deal. But I think some of these things are just about making waves, about making noises, showing that he's the boss and coming into the White House at a time when he's trying to show even allies in Europe that he intends to throw his weight around.
Yeah, we can always count on him for interesting sound bites, that's for sure. And also making big statements that could be a sign of things to come is billionaire tech boss Elon Musk. He's weighing in on politics in the US and elsewhere. He's trolling government leaders online, including the prime ministers of the UK and Canada. You know, Mr. Musk, he is seen as instrumental in getting Mr. Trump where he is, getting him reelected. And I want to read you a few headlines that have come up in the past few months. Take this one. Donald and Elon can't get enough of each other. Another one, Elon Musk backed Trump with over $250 million. And Elon Musk ascends as political force. So, Is this bromance going to peter out? Is Musk really going to have an impact over the next 4 years, Nick?
I mean, it is incredible at the moment when you bear in mind the type of influence that Elon Musk has. One Democratic lawmaker has labelled the incoming presidency the Elon Musk presidency. I mean, he's not an elected official. He's not going to have a confirmation hearing because he won't be filling a cabinet position. And yet he has this outsized influence on politics. You may remember just last month in December, he essentially torpedoed that budget deal that had already been agreed in principle between Democrats and Republicans because he sent out a whole flurry of social media posts at a time when Donald Trump wasn't getting involved and suddenly then felt, look, I've got to back up my friend Elon. And he decided to get involved as well. He's got involved in European politics. He has had, since that election win, really unfettered access to Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago residence. I mean, by some reports, he's been staying over, regularly having dinner. But I think really the influence that he has now really comes down to, I guess, that proximity to the incoming president. You have to wonder what will happen when Donald Trump is in the White House, when he's got the business of running the country on a daily basis. And of course, Elon Musk has to return to all of his business interests. He's got plenty to do. Will he want to be as engaged in the running of the country, the boring day-to-day tedium of it, when Donald Trump is in the White House? That's unclear, but undoubtedly their relationship at the moment and the influence that Musk has is just unbelievable.
Yeah, really, it is. Let's look at the wider Trump team that could take shape when he's back in the White House. Mr. Trump's been feeling the heat for some of his cabinet picks. You know, these nominees, they've courted controversy because of their comments around things like vaccinations, allegations of sexual misconduct, so on. How closely are they going to be scrutinized? And what can we expect in terms of the confirmation process?
Well, they will be scrutinised incredibly closely, in particular by the Democrats, who feel that many of the people who've been chosen just simply do not have the qualifications to fill these very important positions. So what will happen is there will be these oversight committees. They'll hold these confirmation hearings, which can often be something of a bloodbath. We'll see lawmakers lobbing question after question at them, really trying to hammer home what they feel are the inadequacies of these nominees. One of the people who's undoubtedly going to face a grilling is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's a vaccine skeptic, but he's been named to head up the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, if those hearings go well, if those nomination hearings pass, then we could see full votes in the Senate. And even though some of these picks are controversial, it's very rare for picks, when they reach the Senate floor, not to pass that Senate vote. The last time it happened was in the late 80s. But all of this, it's an incredibly slow process. Last time Donald Trump was in office, he only had 2 of his picks confirmed by the time he walked into the Oval Office. And really, it's slow going as we roll into the inauguration.
Mr. Trump is a busy guy. He faces 4 criminal indictments as well, 2 at the federal level, 2 at the state level, not to mention civil cases. What happens now to these legal proceedings?
Essentially, they are dead and buried. Those wins at the ballot box have essentially led to wins in the courtroom because no sitting president can be prosecuted. Now, last summer, the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, said that Donald Trump had partial immunity for any acts that he carried out while in office. That directly related to one of the federal cases, all to do with his efforts to subvert the 2020 election result. That case has now been dismissed, as has the case relating to classified documents he allegedly had in his property in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. The judge that he appointed when he was president first time around threw that case out. The state cases, though, are much harder to dismiss. He has been sentenced in the hush money case. It means he's the first convicted felon to ever serve as president. There is a question as to whether he could pardon himself. And the one other case in Georgia, that's all to do with election subversion as well. Essentially, that one's been frozen. It's likely to be dismissed. There is one other thing that's worth noting. He has said, from a legal perspective, he could pardon many of those more than about 1,500 January the 6th Donald Trump supporters, those rioters who were charged with various different things as a result of that, what some are saying was an insurrection attempt 4 years ago.
Donald Trump re-entering the White House, it also marks Joe Biden's exit from it. Before we go, Nick, I want to talk about Mr. Biden and his political career. What do you think Americans will remember the most about his leadership, and what can we expect from him after he leaves the Oval Office?
Well, in theory, very little. I mean, normally presidents remain quiet, they shuffle off away from the spotlight, they stay out of politics. Donald Trump was an anomaly after he lost the 2020 election, very much remaining part of the Republican Party, remaining very dominant. Now, Joe Biden, he will attend the inauguration of Donald Trump, and then it's likely he'll retire to his beach house in Delaware, and we may not see very much of him after that. How will he be remembered? Well, I guess it's worth remembering the landscape of the United States and the world when he took power back in January 2021. We were in the middle of the pandemic. The economy here in the US was in tatters. There was record high inflation. In many ways, he's got those things under control. He's had major economic policy wins. He's passed the Inflation Reduction Act, passing many signature climate change proposals, the infrastructure bill. They're very big, but I mean, he's probably not going to be remembered for them. He might, however, be remembered for the fact that there were two conflicts during his time in office, both of them springing up, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict. So there is a good chance that he'll be remembered as a good president, but remembered badly. He's had plenty of years of public service, but for the short term, they may be overshadowed by the fact that many Democrats just feel he did not drop out of the race early enough, announcing in July that he was suspending his campaign. Many Democrats feel if he had done that much, much earlier, the party may have had a fighting chance to beat Donald Trump in the election. And I think at least for the short term, he will be remembered really not as well as he could have been if it wasn't for that very, very late dropout.
Nick, I know you're going to be in the thick of inauguration coverage for the network, and I'm so glad you spared a bit of time for us to talk about it today. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can find Nick's reports on YouTube and also on CNA.Asia. And don't forget, there are TV episodes of CNA Correspondent every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. I'm Teresa Tang. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, and Craig Dale. Join us again for more next week. Take care.